Hi everyone, I'm Andy Kolodny. Welcome to the Conscious Parenting Show. If you are joining for the first time, I discuss many topics about parenting, but everything circles back to having unconditional acceptance of who our children are, even if it does not fit with the fantasy of who we parents think they should be. Sometimes we have an unrealized dream that is projected onto our children, or we were successful in an area, so we push this path onto our children. We genuinely do this, believing it's in our children's best interest. For more information about how conscious parenting differs from traditional parenting, please visit my website, parentdoovers.com. You can also go to the North Shore TV YouTube channel to replay this show and watch more conscious parenting episodes. I'm very excited about today's show, The College Journey. The planning often starts way before the child is applying to college, and it's a great topic to tie in with conscious parenting because from experience, I have seen that a successful path is not necessarily a linear path. Our children have unique qualities, and college is not for everyone right out of high school. I remember when my first daughter was graduating high school and I took her to a college fair that was loaded with college booths, and we took a friend of hers as well. Her friend had superb grades, great testing scores, was in all the honors classes. My daughter was a good student, but average. And I remember driving there thinking, oh goodness, this will be, hard to watch her friend at the college booths and then my daughter. And when we got there, what I realized was her friend was terrified to go and speak to the representatives, yet my daughter had no fear, and she confidently walked up to each booth, gathered up information, spoke to them about their criteria, and I just stood back and I observed, wow, look at my daughter. She's got this aspect to her. It's not all just about grades. So today my guest is Susan Elliott. She is the retired principal of Great Neck South High School, and she was also the founding principal at the Eleanor Roosevelt High School on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. Susan is currently an adjunct professor at Hunter College, where she mentors graduate students in their final semester of their master's program in administration. I was lucky that my children were in high school when Susan was there, and we had the opportunity to work closely together through the PTA. There was so much discussion about the college journey, advanced placement classes, and the gifted and talented program, which parents felt was the ticket to their children's success and happiness. Susan also has two of her own grown children and a grandson, so she has encountered everything as an educator, administrator, parent, and grandparent. Let's turn the conversation over to include Susan and her expert opinion on the best way to navigate this time in our children's lives. Hi, Susan. Thanks so much for coming today. I remember way back in 2008 when you were first coming to Great Neck South as the principal, and I was asked to be part of the PTA. I remember meeting with you and sitting down with you and knowing nothing about you, just saying, Susan, tell me about your philosophy and your philosophy of students. And I didn't know if you were going to say, well, the students need to be, they should be here. I want everybody really bought in. And I remember you saying to me, Andy, this is the way I think about it. Every student in the school is unique, and it's their uniqueness that makes them special. And the goal for the PTA is to have parents understand that they should really empower their children to be the best versions of themselves, and then to trust the process that everything will work out for them. And I knew we were going to work well together.
It's true.
So I have a few questions for you that I know our viewers will be very interested to hear. So I'm just going to go through them because I did take some time to write them down because your wisdom is really needed here. So when do parents typically start talking about the college process, and when should they start talking about the college process?
Well, people can get very crazy about the college process. And there are different levels of it. I mean, I think that parents naturally imbue their kids with a vision of the future that's going to include things like college from the time that they're really young. You know, a kid is talking about his teeth and the parent will say, oh, maybe you want to be a dentist, maybe you're going to do this. That's kind of natural, normal, healthy stuff. I've had parents come visit the school, ask all different questions about colleges and what our placement rate is and where the kids go to school and how many AP classes. And then I've asked them, you know, well, they're thinking about moving to the neighborhood and they want to make sure that this school will prepare their child for college. And I'll say, oh, and what grade is your child going into? Thinking it's 9th, 10th, 11th, and they'll go, 2nd. That's a whole different level. And I think what's really important is that parents understand that kids are going to take their own path. Not that they don't need support and direction, but at the same time, you need to be kind of the person running, holding on to the back of the bicycle and knowing when to let go. I tell parents that once you're in high school, it's not a bad idea to visit colleges. If you're in Washington, D.C. and you want to visit a college campus, or you're up near Columbia and you want to look at it, that's fine. It's important that a kid in high school be able to be in high school and be a high school student, and then and be involved in the activities that they are genuinely interested in, rather than thinking that they have to play the piccolo because they heard somewhere that'll
get them into college.
Yeah.
Exactly. I do remember a guidance counselor saying that colleges look for passion, and that when we're true to, we know when we're true to our hearts, we tend to do better in general, just in life. And you know, we think about jobs that we take, like if you're doing a job because you're just going for the paycheck, you burn out.
And it's not how you want to live your life.
Right.
When my niece was applying to colleges, she asked me to help her prepare for her interview. And she's telling me, we're practicing, and she's saying, oh, I was president of the French club, and I was this, and I was that. And I said, Jess, you fly on the trapeze. That's what you love to do. You should tell them that, because that'll be an interesting thing during the interview. Like, they're not going to know that about you from your application. And she said, Aunt Susan, they don't want to know about that. And I said, just trust me. And she came back after the interview and she said, I mentioned the trapeze and they really perked up, and I showed them a video, and she ended up getting into the school of her choice. And the funny thing was, I thought about sharing that story in Great Neck, and I thought, I can't do it because everybody will have their kid flying on the trapeze.
That actually is hilarious.
Right?
Yes. So the other thing I wanted to ask you is there a situation where you saw an unbelievable amount of stress when it comes to testing? Because starting in elementary school, testing became such a big thing, and then we talk about the SATs, and we talk about this, and so kids go for years and years and years, and then finally it's time to take those SATs, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is what it is. It's like a whole mental mindset. Now, this was not my children, and my children sort of took it in stride, but I just trusted that the process would work out for them, and they were not self-motivated for the Ivies. And that was okay with me. If they were self-motivated and they were going there, I would have worked with them on that. But that's just not who they were. And it's not where my children got stuck. They've gone on to graduate schools and things like that, where the maturity kicked in and then they surpassed expectations.
One of the things that I'm really grateful for is that more and more schools, more and more colleges are test optional now, because not everybody tests well, and not everybody who tests well is a great student or somebody who's going to enhance the learning community that you're running. So I think it gets very tricky with standardized tests, and it also is a dangerous measure of what somebody's capable of. My younger son was a late reader, and his best friend was an early reader. And when they got to high school, my son had a much higher SAT score than this other kid. And he said to me, "Mom, you're not going to believe it." He said, "My score was so much higher." And I realized at that moment that his whole life, from first grade or kindergarten, he had thought that he was not as bright because his test scores in elementary school were, his reading score, he was in the Blue Jays instead of the Canaries,
The polar bears,
or whatever.
right, right, exactly.
And you realize the impact that this stuff has. So I think it's not nothing. I think people should prepare, however. But again, if you're somebody who's driven to the Ivy Leagues, or you're planning to go to MIT or whatever, and you're the kind of person who should do that, by all means, spend as much time as you like preparing. When I was at Eleanor Roosevelt High School, one of the things that we looked at were test scores when we were having kids come in, not SAT scores, but standardized test scores. And if we had a kid who had very high test scores and low grades, we knew that that was a kid who didn't like to work. So it didn't necessarily serve them.
Right. I remember, I don't know if you remember this, my kids were not in the advanced placement classes. They were not in the gifted and talented, which we'll talk about after, after you know my thought on that. And I remember you calling me one day and saying, "Oh, congratulations. My daughter had done really well on some art project." It was like an art class where she had taken these Barbie dolls and put them in various
I remember that. That was great. Yeah.
And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And you said she got this advanced placed. And I said, "I don't even know what you're talking about." I said, "And it's so funny you mentioned that for that art project, because I was thinking she might need to see a therapist because of the way she depicted these Barbie dolls." And you were like, "No, this is a subjective thing, and this is real." And I had no idea she had put in for that. I had no idea she was doing that. And so that was just something she did on her own. And, so just so interesting. But let's circle back to, my favorite topic, the Gifted and Talented program.
Yes.
I don't know where that started, but I used to call it the Gifted and Tutored. So
my kids in Brooklyn, my own children, were in this Gifted and Talented program for junior high school, which they called the Rainbow Program. And we called it the Rainbow Program because if you mix all the colors of the rainbow together, you get white.
Oh.
And I think a lot of the Gifted and Talented programs are programs to carefully, not so much racially as in terms of social class, keep kids around kids that their parents want them to be with.
Oh, wow.
So there's that. If there was a kid, when my older son was in first grade, his teacher was out, maybe it was maternity leave or something, but she was out for a chunk of time. And most of the kids did whatever they were doing. The sub was not very good. And there was one girl in the class who wrote 2 plays and a book, first grade. That's a gifted and talented kid. And it didn't matter that the teacher wasn't, not that teachers don't matter and not that they're not inspiring, but if you're a kid who has some kind of gift or is talented or is thirsty about knowledge, you're going to shine wherever you are.
I remember you saying that because I remember parents would come in and ask you to switch their kids' classes and switch teachers and jockey their schedules to make sure. And I remember you saying to me, the child who is academically talented is definitely going to thrive regardless of where you put them.
And I used to say to people, like, if you're a certain kind of person and I could get you into MIT, that would not necessarily be doing you a favor. You know, you have to be. I would have parents who would call up and say and complain that their kids had reading assignments over the summer when they were going into AP English. Well, if you're not somebody who likes to read over the summer, you really shouldn't be going into AP English.
Right. It's the kid who in AP English would take the books on their vacation with them and read the 3 books on vacation.
Exactly.
Because it's their joy and pleasure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe you have to push them, remind them of the 3rd book.
Right.
But you certainly don't have to pull them down from climbing trees to do that.
Right. And you shouldn't be saying, like, this is ridiculous. You're now taking away from my child's camp experience or
Exactly.
whatever. And then maybe, right, you know, the other thing was my son turned out to be really good in math. And again, I wasn't completely on top. I wasn't so grade oriented, so I didn't know so much. And all of a sudden, his scores came back on, because testing was big at the time, on those subject SAT tests, that he was really exceptional in math. And it turns out he's now in computer programming. But he you know what, he just figured, it all got figured out later. It was not a linear path for my kids. It's a winding road. And I find that that's the other thing, is parents feel like if you put them on this linear path, and they traject to the linear path, then it's sort of like this lifeline golden ticket that will create success. And then what does success mean regarding happiness? I've seen lots of kids go into strive for investment banking and then a year and a half later go into social work.
It's a very, first of all, you have to really be paying attention to your kid and letting them be who they are. Not that, my son once said, he said, you know, they say that you should do what you love. He said, but I don't think anybody's going to hire me to sit on the couch and watch TV and eat potato chips. So, I mean, there is that. You can't not be paying attention, you know, at all. But it's important that they find their way. And there's a wonderful, I think the best graduation speech I ever heard. Steve Jobs gave a speech at Stanford, and what he talks about is exactly that. He says that you do all these random things in your life, and in retrospect, it looks like this brilliant path of all these dots being connected. But at the time, it's just the next thing that you're doing.
Right.
You know, he said that he took a class, after he had dropped out of Reed, he was able to audit classes, and he took a calligraphy class that he loved, that he never would have taken if he was still in a degree program. And that was the basis for all the fonts in Apple.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
So you just don't know.
Right.
You know, and you have to kind of, you really do have to trust the process.
I have also seen that kids who are going to thrive will thrive at whatever school they go to, because every school, whether it's state, community, they all have endowments, they have grants, and they have opportunity. And kids who seek out opportunities have very nice experiences, where other kids might go to Yale, Harvard, and sort of stay in the classroom and just, you know, experience the education through the classroom, where other kids are traveling to India. And, you know, just my son actually went from Buffalo. He spent a year in Japan,
Right.
because he was sort of selected by a teacher who saw he had a passion for the language, that I don't know if he would have had the time to embark on Japanese if he was in a school that was tougher for him.
Well, and also, I mean, there's been a lot of research on this, and one of the things that happens is that if you're in a less academically I wouldn't even say demanding, I would say somehow the PR for that school is not what it is for someplace else. You also often have access to teachers who are actually teaching the class rather than graduate assistants, who get to know you, who get to know that you have a passion for Japanese or for calligraphy or for whatever it, or to say, you know what would be interesting for you, why don't you blah, blah, blah.
Right, exactly.
So it really, I have a friend who became a superintendent of schools who started out in community college. She wasn't in high school, she was doing other stuff, and you know, it takes people different amounts of time to find their way.
Right, and then often when you give it a little bit more time, you end up kind of grabbing on your passion and you take it from there and you become successful.
There's also, I've known several kids whose parents have helped them with writing assignments and things like that, and often those kids feel that they're incompetent. They don't see their parents' help as an act of love or their
Right. So it diminishes the
so it
child's
actually
confidence.
Exactly.
Right. So what is the common denominator that you see in students who have done well?
I think the most important thing for kids who do, they're confident and they're able to fail. They're able, obviously if they fail everything it's a different story, but they're able to fail and learn from their mistakes. When I've had kids in trouble in my office, if a parent would come in for a kid who had to be in fairly serious trouble to be in my office, when the parent came in, if the parent came in and said, oh my God, we're going to talk about this at home, we're very concerned, what does this mean, we need to do whatever, let's examine this, I knew that that kid was going to be okay, because high school is a good place to mess up and learn from it.
Right, under the parents'
Under
roof.
the parents' roof,
Right.
under the school's
Under the
roof.
guidance, yes.
You know, as long as you're not killing anybody or
Yes.
doing anything terrible, it's an important place to be able
Yes.
to do something goofy. If I had a parent who would come in and say, not my child, that would never happen, you know, the other kids must have been doing worse things than them, or the teacher is lying, or whatever, that kid was going to be in trouble, because the message that the parent was giving them was that they weren't allowed to fail. They weren't allowed to mess up. And if you're not allowed to mess up, how do you learn anything, and how do you do anything?
That's the key thing, is learning.
So
yes.
I think that's the key. I mean, right now we have several graduates of Great Neck South, and actually several graduates at Eleanor Roosevelt, who are in major positions. They are in wonderful places in their careers. And all of them, I would say, 2-1, the thing that they had going for them was that ability, that kind of trust in the universe, that if they misstepped, things weren't going to fall apart.
Right, right, exactly, confidence, and also willing to not be part of the mainstream.
Exactly.
Like there are a couple of students that I know of personally from Great Neck who have done very well. I know one is currently on Broadway, and one student is on Saturday Night Live, and one student has a phenomenal internet company. And when I think of them, I see confidence and not feeling like they had to sort of be a lemming in the hallway, you know, and struggling through, you know, class after class after class. Not that there's a problem with that if that's what inspires you. I have a friend whose daughter, excellent student, did nicely. And I remember saying to her, how do I get my kids to do homework like you? I wasn't a conscious parent at the time. And she said to me, when I go home, I get like a high from doing my schoolwork. I like it. Like, it's fun for me. It's like a puzzle. She said, I like leaving class, not really understanding something and going home and make sure I learn it. She said, but don't put me on the field. Don't put me in front of anybody. Don't put me on the stage. She said, that's what makes me feel good. And I thought, wow, so she just had, I called it academic maturity, where other kids have sports maturity or
social maturity,
exactly,
or artistic.
Exactly. And so that was such a nice, eye-opener for me.
I think that's one of the hard things about high school in a certain way, is that you're expected to be good at everything. And that's kind of the image, the kind of, high school, just doing everything right. And the saddest thing for me would be I would see kids having real anxiety attacks, not nervousness before a test, but real anxiety because they felt that they needed to do everything perfectly. And who's able to do that? I mean, even if you're the most gifted and talented and mature and whatever, you're still not going to be able to do that. And to have that as the weight upon them.
I think it's that learning and resiliency.
Yeah.
That is needed.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's actually a good thing. Like, I know one of the things I talk about a lot was I grew up doing gymnastics. And I remember learning to do a handstand, like on the balance beam. And the way we learned to do it was we had to learn how to fall before we could master the move. And we would pile up foam mats, and we would have to kick up where we actually went over. So that, because you can't get to your high point because you don't know if you're going this way or this way. And we were taught how to fall before we were taught how to actually do the move. So that's just really such a good analogy.
Yeah, I had an art teacher who used to go in and teach. The first lesson was having everyone draw with their non-dominant hand. And he would model drawing with his non-dominant hand. And it just freed everything up. It's important to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I actually remember picking up my child at the Great Neck Art Center, and there was a pretty picture of a flower, and there was this dribble of paint that went down. And I said, oh, too bad about the dribble of paint. And the teacher said to me, no, that's the art.
Yeah.
And I was like, ah. And then years later, I got into the conscious parenting, and now that dribble is my best part of the painting.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. So just one other quick question. You sort of brought it up with the rainbow, and that kind of struck a chord, and we didn't extrapolate on that. But if a child wants to go to a school, regardless of race, color, there's a lot of things going on in this world. What happens if the affordability is not there?
Well, first of all, it's a funny thing with finances in school. If you really don't have the means, there are a million different ways to have financial aid. I think the hardest, and often I've had kids who found private schools more affordable than public schools because of the financial aid that was given. There are some for different kids of different strengths. There are a lot of really remarkable scholarships out there. I guess the ultimate scholarship is the Gates Scholarship, which when I would interview kids for that, it was amazing what these kids were doing in high school. And again, not because somebody was making them do that, but because that was who they were and what their lives were. And when you get a scholarship like that, it's like you have a billionaire, generous parent. They pay for everything. If you want to do a semester abroad, if you need to go home on vacation, if you need a computer. But there are lots of other ways to pay for school and to have school paid for. A lot of times, kids who are not the strongest students will go to a 2-year school and build up their grades and kind of cut out the amount of time that they need to be in a private 4-year school and then transfer into it.
Right.
And there are lots of scholarships and grants and sliding scales. If you get into an Ivy League school, those are among the most affordable schools because they have so much money that they use sliding scales
Right.
a lot.
And I'm just going to ask you one more question before we close the segment. So, as you're a principal and you with students, and what was the difference being a mom and now a grandmother to children and students?
I think, well, the difference between being a mom and being a grandmother is huge.
Well, let's do
But
principal, mom,
right,
grandma.
Okay.
Right.
So I think being a principal in a lot of ways made me a better mother, and being a mother made me a better principal.
Oh, interesting.
I could understand my kids in a whole different kind of way. I think that we still, of course, had our moments, but I think seeing all the other kids made me look at my kids sometimes differently. Somebody had told me years ago that the only experience they ever had that didn't meet that met the hype of what people said was a great experience was being a grandparent, because you have all of the love and all of the fun with none of the responsibility.
Right.
I was in a bake shop one day with my grandson, and they had these little cupcakes that we were picking out for dessert. And I said to him, "What do you want, chocolate or vanilla?" And he said, "Both." And I stopped for a minute, and if it were my kids, I would have said, "No, pick one." And I said, "Okay." And I think that's the difference between being a mother and being a grandmother.
Right, I love that. So great, we're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This was so great. And I think let's just reiterate that is just trust the process, don't game the system, and really trust your child and have confidence in your child so that your child can have confidence in themselves.
And let them discover themselves. They're gonna find. I'll just tell you one last thing. There was a girl at Eleanor Roosevelt who was very into science and math, and I met her a couple of years ago, and she now designs the yogurt flavors. When you get those things that flip and you get like Coco Loco, that's her job, and she loves it. And
that's funny because I always wanted to be the person to pick out nail polish colors.
There you go.
I want to name nail polish colors.
So you just, that's not something that you aim for your child, but she's had a wonderful career.
That's so great. Thank you so much again for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, Susan, that was such a great conversation. I really enjoyed that, and I really like a lot of what you said, and just about trusting the process. And like we talked about briefly after the show, we don't even know in this day and age where the jobs are going to be in the future. So really to just trust your child's uniqueness, let them be themselves, trust the process, and just flow with your child and enjoy your child. Because before you know it, they will be in college, getting married, out of your house. Let them be high school students in high school. If you would like to contact me directly with any questions, or if you wish to share your own journey, please go to my website at parentdoovers.com and connect with me there. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.